Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Welcome back once again to the GSMC Baseball Podcast here on the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Collin Manley, and we have a great episode to talk about. We are getting towards Thanksgiving. By the time you hear this, it's going to be Wednesday, so one day away. And we got to make sure that you get your baseball fix, your baseball news in before the holiday. And it's going to be one of our last podcasts being posted for a little bit. We're going to have some guys taking a little bit of time off. They're going to get to spend the holiday with family, friends. Maybe it depends what they're doing. It's going to be a weird, different Thanksgiving for a lot of people. So we got to make sure that we cover as much news as we possibly can. And to do that, we're going to be talking about a lot of different things covering around the MLB today. We're going to take our look into our rumor mill. We have some updates coming across the league on some potential fits, potential moves that we might be having, trade targets, all of that. So we're going to make sure that we have you up to date on everything that's been happening there. We're going to talk about some pros and cons on the shortstop market. It was a great MLB.com article, but it's just something very interesting to talk about. I think the shortstop position is one of the most intriguing on the free agency front, at least for sure the free agency front. So we got to make sure that we take a little time to discuss that. And I also want to talk about another player in free agency that could end up being a big move overall. We took the time to break down a lot of different players when it came to looking at free agency with Marcell Ozuna, Trevor Bauer, DJ LeMahieu, JT Realmuto. Those have been the four that we've spent a lot of time on. But I have another name that I think is going to be very interesting, and there's a lot of potential fits. So I want to make sure that we take the time to discuss that. But to start off the podcast, like we normally like to do, we're going to do a little news and noise around the league, getting you caught up on all 30 MLB teams and some big-time news. And there was no bigger news, probably so far, than an actual free agent acquisition. The Atlanta Braves have decided to sign right-handed pitcher Charlie Morton to a one-year, $15 million deal. Yes, the team that is the king, absolute king of the one-year deals and getting the most out of players, well, they're going to look to be at it again. And what's funny enough is this is kind of a reunion, almost a return to the Atlanta Braves. Now, Morton, who's 37, has quite a reputation as a big-time pitcher. Played in a lot of games. Game 7 of the 2017 World Series with Houston. Game 7 in the ALCS this last year for the Rays. That's something that is going to get you paid when you are successful in those situations. Atlanta having some issues with starters going into the postseason this year may have mightily turned that situation around when it comes to the 2021 season. We talked about it a lot with injuries and concerns on what their starting rotation looks like. Well, next year, it's looking to be a lot stronger. We talked about this Braves team getting interested in the free agent market for pitchers. But it's looking like the additions of Morton and Drew Smyly recently to join their young core of impressive starters of Max Fried, Ian Anderson, and Mike Soroka, who, if you remember, had a torn Achilles a month into the season. And before Soroka even returns, if he does come back at the start of the season, might not be likely. They have some other guys in Kyle Wright and Bryce Wilson who could take a rotation spot. And Morton became available after turning down a $15 million club option with the Rays, so the pay doesn't seem to be a major difference looking at, early reports. And the Rays wanted him to resign, but it seems like they were unwilling to match that $15 million that he was going to get for Tampa Bay, and so Atlanta was able to pay that. And so now we have Morton going back to the Braves. 2 strong seasons in Tampa Bay. He really was. I mean, 18-8, 3.33 ERA, third in AL Cy Young last year. A lot of great things for him. So, congratulations to Charlie Morton getting that money, able to secure a 1-year contract. It's what Atlanta does. It's their thing. That's what they're doing. Keeping things on the topic of Tampa Bay, well, some bad news for the Rays. Not only is Morton not coming back, but Tampa Bay Rays outfielder Randy Arozarena is detained in Mexico's Yucatan state for a situation involving allegations of domestic violence. So definitely not something to joke around about at all. And it's early on with a lot of the reports. It seems to be issues related to an ex-partner, having to deal with a child was something that I had read before to go along with it. Nothing is formally charged so far, and the MLB is looking into the matter. No public comment coming from Arozarena. It's not clear with the lawyers what 100% is going on here. We just know he's detained at the moment. And if there's anything that we could kind of give to go off of this, Mexican law allows a 2-day period for prosecutors to decide whether to bring charges. Normally, suspects are held in jail pending that decision, so it could be a couple days before we hear anything more. Granted, it could come sooner. So this is more of an early information on this story. More to be coming in the future for Tampa Bay. The New York Mets have decided to focus on hiring a general manager. They have abandoned their search for a president of baseball operations at the moment. Instead, focus on hiring that general manager, who will report to team president Sandy Alderson. Alderson will return for his second season as manager, or he told Luis Rojas he's going to return his second season as manager. And so things are starting to fall into place a little bit for the Mets. I'm sure they're really trying to get things straightened out because we continue to hear how aggressive they want to be this offseason, being in play for a lot of different players, whether it's free agency or trade. There was recently a tweet from Buster Olney talking about how all of this noise about them being involved is very real looking into a lot of different players. So the Mets trying to straighten out their front office, managerial position, all that. It's just little parts that they need to get going and keep moving along so that way they could go and convince these guys to sign, make some trades, what have you. There's a lot that needs to be going on for the Mets. So just kind of a little bit of an update of what they're going on. And, Sandy Alderson had returned to the team November 6th when Steve Cohen had completed his purchase of the Mets. So we kind of have known that that's going to be the case for a long time. I know that there's been floated rumors about potential names, but we don't necessarily have. We have a lot of guys that have been talked about as, potential options. But I don't know if there's anything that's for sure. I mean, Theo Epstein obviously was a guy that was brought into the conversation just because he's moving on from the Cubs, had his time with the Red Sox, moving on from the Cubs. They thought maybe the Mets or Phillies would be a good option, but he seems pretty intent on staying away for at least this season. So we'll see if any more news comes out of that. When we stick around with all of the front office moves, well, the Chicago Cubs and President Jed Hoyer got a new contract, 5-year contract. So speaking of Theo Epstein, we got some moves that come here. This was announced on Monday. Agreed 5-year deal with Jed Hoyer that'll run through the 2025 season. 46-year-old Hoyer was promoted to president of baseball operations when Theo Epstein stepped down last week. He was quoted, team chairman Tom Ricketts was quoted in a statement saying, "My family and I believe he's going to be an incredible baseball operations president, and Cubs fans have one of the best in the business leading the team to continue our commitment to sustained success," end quote. And it's a big move. You're putting a face down because the Cubs have a lot of decisions away. So not only do they have a lot of big contracts that they're still paying, Jason Hayward, Yu Darvish, Kyle Hendricks, those are all happening. They're in the middle of those contracts. But we have core players that have been there for quite some time, being a part of the whole World Series rebuild and everything, and Javier Baez, Chris Bryant, Anthony Rizzo, and Kyle Schwarber, who all are eligible to become free agents after next season. So these are some big decisions coming down in Chicagoland for all the Cubs. this team could look very different in a couple of years. Very different. So we just have our official guy, Jed Hoyer, getting that contract extension to be the man going forward. Some other moves that we're seeing within some teams. DeMarlo Hale is going to replace Brad Mills on Terry Francona's Cleveland Indians coaching staff. Francona has assembled his coaching staff for the season, but his longtime friend and bench coach Brad Mills is not going to be a part of it. Now, this is an interesting situation because Francona, who missed much of last season with some very serious health issues, is having this replacement happen. And David Hale, who's 59, joins the Indian staff after spending the last 2 years with the Braves. Hale had previously been with Francona in Boston from 2006 to 2011, serving as the bench coach in 2010 and 2011. Since then, Hale has been with Texas, Baltimore, Toronto. He's been around. He's had a lot of different options. Mills, who opted out of the 2020 season for personal reasons, will remain with the Indians, but is in a yet-to-be-determined capacity. So this is something that I can see only really helping the Indians. They're trying to strengthen up their coaching staff. If Terry Francona just returning to the building is going to be a great thing. He's a top-notch manager, successful in Boston, successful in Cleveland. He truly is one of the best. So I look forward to what's going to happen there. Any decision that Francona is involved in, I always think it's going to be a great one. I just have too many fond memories of him when he was with Boston and all the great things he's done. So just a small move there in the coaching staff. But like I said, if Francona is making that decision, it's probably going to be a great one. And lastly, we have a little bit of schedule news. This is a fun one, exciting one. Chicago White Sox are to host the New York Yankees in the Field of Dreams game on August 12th. That game taking place in Dyersville, Iowa. MLB said Monday that the plan is tentative, contingent on the status of public health next summer. So obviously this thing could still change if we don't see any real massive moves forward with the coronavirus, whether it be, cases going down, some type of, just any positive news, any type of vaccine for the whole situation. Now, the teams are scheduled as of now to play at the temporary ballpark next to where the Field of Dreams movie site was. And that was last August 13th. 8,000 capacity field. When the MLB schedule was revamped because of the coronavirus, the Yankees were replaced as the opponent by the St. Louis Cardinals, but the game was called off because of the pandemic. So we haven't really seen a game there, for a little while. So it's going to be a fluid thing. A lot can change. A lot can happen. So don't expect this to be a guarantee. But as of right now, we are penciling in White Sox Yankees. So not only would that be a fun experience because of, Field of Dreams. Everyone, if you're a baseball lover, you've seen Field of Dreams. You know all about it. But being able to play in that situation, not only that, but we're taking two what are expected to be great teams to play in this game. So that makes it an exciting situation. And we're all hopeful that with everything going on in the world, we get to take a positive step forward and this game happens. Fingers crossed, knock on wood, do whatever I have to do and hoping that this all comes to be true. So that's going to be it for news and noise, getting you caught up on all teams around the league. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the rumor mill. We got to get you updated. There's been a lot of noise since the last time we had updated on this. And who knows? This is starting to feel like we're getting more information when it comes to free agency signings, but also trades, more team involvement. Some of them that we haven't updated you on before. A little shocking. But we're going to take a quick break, come right back to that here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
just can't stop thinking about the idea of being able to be a professional baseball player and playing on the Field of Dreams field. You know, you dream of all these days of being able to play in front of thousands of people in major stadiums, and I just don't think many people think of that situation, and I find that absolutely crazy. Like a major league game going down on that field, that's something to just absolutely behold and be a part of. It truly has to be awesome. But we need to move on. We need to keep going. We need to start talking about some actual rumor mill information that's going on. And like I said before, we are getting some new updated stuff, some contract talks all over the place, even some trade rumors. We have a lot that we can get diving into. And we're going to start off with our Houston Astros team, who has a lot of questions when it comes to what their outfield is going to look like next year. But there definitely is a lot of security when it comes to their infield. And it looks like we could potentially have a little more uncertainty when it comes to next season for the Astros. Now, there's reports that the Astros are floating Carlos Correa in some trade talks. And, like we said, outfield, George Springer could be gone, along with others. And the Astros are considering trades for Correa, trying to build up a little bit with the team. Now, what is interesting about this is Correa, at 26 years old, can be a part of the loaded shortstop free agency class next year. And Houston knows it is unlikely to sign him to an extension before then. They think he's going to go test the market. So they are just floating him around in trade discussions right now. I don't necessarily look at this and think a trade is going to happen. But if they get blown away with some sort of offer, don't be surprised to see Houston move ahead with it. He's been a staple in their lineup for quite some time. Former number 1 overall pick in the 2012 MLB draft. He's dealt with injuries in his career. He's posted a 709 OPS in 2020. But defensively, he's always been great. OPS is closer to 833 lifetime. He's just a proven player. And that actually might make him, an intriguing trade target. I think a lot of people are going to be looking at these players again. They don't look at last season as much because it was so strange, unique, and shortened that you almost kind of have to throw some of that out the window. So don't be surprised if someone sees this and gets, intrigued in the fact that maybe we can move forward and get Correa to help our team, even if it's only for 1 year. Some other pitching news that we have: Cincinnati Reds, they might lose Trevor Bauer in free agency. We know that. But now it seems like they are open to trading Sonny Gray as well. Gray is signed for $20 million over the next 2 seasons and has a $12 million club option for 2023. He is a very cheap and affordable pitcher, which is why I'm not 100% sure why the Reds want to make this move. We've heard that they've been interested in being competitive this year. We've heard rumblings of Francisco Lindor to the Reds. I don't understand necessarily why they'd want to get one of their cheap top starting pitchers off the team, but it's just something that's being potentially floated around right now. I don't think it's a great move unless if they're getting an absolutely amazing return back. I mean, there is some contract control, and if he's pitching at all like he did last year, there's a lot of value there. But it might just be a move in which the Reds are trying to say, hey, we know after Trevor Bauer, free agent starters are not that great, that deep, especially with Morton being gone. Maybe the trade market picks up a little bit. There's also been some talks of the Rays are willing to move Blake Snell that for the right deal. Man, that's the big part there, for the right deal. They're not just going to give him away knowing how valuable he is to their team. But also, the Rays need to be heavily convinced when you lose Morton, can you afford to just lose Snell on top of that? And there's 2 of your top starting pitchers just gone. So I don't know if that's necessarily going to be an easy sell. But another guy that's potentially on the move, and I've been clamoring for this one, banging the table for too long, it's finally starting to sound like it could potentially happen, is the Rangers are listening to offers for Lance Lynn. And Lance Lynn is a guy who's on a 1 year, I think it's $8 million contract, very cheap, very affordable, and he's been good over the last couple seasons. That's a no-brainer to get some great return back. So the free agent market wasn't loaded for starting pitchers, not loaded. but it seems like trade targets are starting to become available, or at least teams are floating names out there just to see what they could possibly get as a return. Now, once again, stop me if you've heard this one. We've mentioned Buster Olney talking about the Mets trying to be aggressive this offseason. There is actually starting to be some names thrown around that the Mets are potentially targeting. And not just targeting one, but looking to acquire multiple players from this offseason. Buster Olney had reported George Springer, JT Realmuto, Trevor Bauer, and Francisco Lindor, and potentially DJ LeMahieu on that list, trying to walk away with, at a minimum, one of these guys. So there's belief that the Mets are going to increase payroll, and that's coming right from Steve Cohen. They think that he's going to be very competitive, trying to get players. So no surprise here that the reports are saying that he's going to be all in trying to get multiple players. And this is interesting in the sense because we've been seeing them linked potentially to Francisco Lindor before, being trade speculation there. So we'll see if that goes any further in the future. Now, we also have the Blue Jays starting to show more interest as well in free agency. Now, we had talked about how Michael Brantley was a guy that was potentially interesting, George Springer, DJ LeMahieu, but they just continue to be coming out. Brantley being more of the new one, but also Justin Turner potentially being a move that could be happening here. Now, I don't think that one's too crazy in the sense because Vlad Guerrero being moved more to the first base DH position, not going to be playing third base. So it's not a crazy idea to think that they would be interested in Justin Turner and Brantley. They've at least been in contact. It seems like coming from Ken Rosenthal of The Athletic, Toronto's reaching out to these two. Again, considered to be one of the more aggressive teams this offseason. Blue Jays have already signed Robbie Ray to a 1-year, $8 million deal. Reports that they'd offered Kevin Gausman a 3-year contract in the $40 million range before he accepted the Giants' qualifying offer of $18.9 million for just this season. So taking the more of a lump pay sum this year than longevity. There's just a lot that could be happening with this team. I think Vlad Guerrero moving over to first base just opens up a lot of options for Blue Jays as they now have that hole at third. Travis Shaw was the guy that started there, but he's not necessarily a guarantee to be back. Justin Turner, he's coming off an all right tenure there with the Dodgers, hitting .302 with 116 homers over the last 7 seasons. DJ LeMahieu is primarily a second baseman, someone we talked about, but occasionally played third. So that's not out of the world of possibility when it comes to talking about where he could fit. And, in the outfield, the Blue Jays have some names, but we don't know if they necessarily feel comfortable with all of them moving forward. Signing George Springer or Michael Brantley increases the likelihood of the trade of one of their outfielders because out of the 3 that they have out there, Grushik and Hernandez have club control through 2023. Gurriel has club control through 2024. So if there's a move for one of those outfielders, I think that they could definitely be trading one of the others. But also on top of it, there is some reports coming from the MLB Network that Toronto is one of several teams also interested in JT Realmuto. So trying to upgrade at that catcher position, I believe that, every team that's a contender that doesn't have a top catcher when it comes to either elite offense or elite defense is going to be looking at Realmuto. So I don't think there's necessarily any surprise there. Blue Jays just continue to be a team that's throwing their name in every single hat, it feels like. It's going to be the Mets. It's going to be the Blue Jays. Don't be surprised. You're going to be hearing a lot of talk around these two teams. They're just continuing to be aggressive. Staying with some pitching options, we're going to talk about how ESPN's Buster Olney said that free agent righty Jake Odorizzi is drawing a significant amount of interest. And this ties right back to the free agent starting pitching market is not the greatest. And he might be the most coveted option outside of Trevor Bauer. Now, Odorizzi had a troubling 2020 season when it came to being injured. Only 13 and 2/3 innings total on the season. But the previous year, he pitched to a 3.51 ERA, about 10 strikeouts per 9 innings, and that's over 30 starts. He could have tested free agency last year, but he ended up taking a qualifying offer, and it's just looking to be like he is going to be more of an option. There's not a lot of great names out there. Tanaka, Paxton, Kluber. I mean, we just lost Morton to the Braves, so that's not going to seem to happen. Just after Bauer, it falls off. It really does fall off, so don't be surprised about other guys getting some serious conversations for a lot of different teams. Another starting pitcher, though, that could be on the move, and most likely on the move, it seems like his time with the Chicago Cubs is going to be gone, is Jon Lester. And the team that has been interested is the Giants. The San Francisco Giants have been looking to add at least one more starting pitcher in the offseason. That's coming from MLB.com. And San Francisco seems to be pretty interested. Now, the Giants, like we mentioned before, brought back Kevin Gausman for 2021 on an $18.9 million contract. But they need to replace Drew Smyly, who just ended up going off to the Braves, who signed a 1-year, $11 million contract. So Lester is considered to be one of the Giants' options since he is leaving the Cubs most likely. And I don't know how I feel about this. Lester is an interesting name, and I've read that he could go to teams that are not contenders, like he could go to Boston, reunite there, be a guy to eat some innings. He could go to a contender and be a back-end valuable guy just because of experience. There's really a lot of different ways that he could go. Now, he's durable. He's durable, but 4.64 ERA in the past 2 seasons, 5.16 mark in 2020. It's not like he's the Jon Lester of old. He's not the ace that he used to be, but he's still going to get some interest just because of experience, durability, and if you get to the postseason, you can probably trust him a little bit more. So we'll see what happens with that one. I think Lester's going to be a name that's going to be thrown around for quite a few teams. We just don't know 100% how a lot of people feel about that one. Talking about Jon Lester and his Red Sox, well, the Red Sox have also talked to the Cubs about a potential Chris Bryant trade. And now, while 2020 was a very rough season for the Red Sox, it seems like they're still trying to make some additions, trying to see if they can improve the team at all. And that's where the conversations for third baseman Chris Bryant came in. But reports are showing, and this is coming from Chicago Tribune's Mark Gonzalez, that it didn't seem like the talks got any major significant traction. I am a little confused on this one, not only as a baseball fan, but as a Red Sox fan, when you have Rafael Devers at third base. And it seems like Gonzalez is reporting that Boston might be looking at Bryant as more of an outfielder and a left fielder. And if that is the case, it looks like the Red Sox might potentially be looking to move on from Andrew Benintendi, Boston's current left fielder, and over the past 2 years has not been what he used to be. Had a .255 batting average, 13 homers in 152 games in the last 2 seasons. Missing a lot of time with injury issues, and there is also talks about Benintendi moving to center field if Jackie Bradley Jr. doesn't come back. So this is an interesting option for Boston. We'll see where it truly leads to, but I don't know if this one gets done, but if it does, it could be a quick move and just kind of surprise us and sneak up on us. Another one, when it comes to surprising move that maybe we didn't see coming, is Nolan Arenado being a potential target for the Cardinals. Now, over the past 2 seasons, Cardinals third basemen have been the 8th lowest OPS in the MLB. And that's why a lot of people think Arenado makes a lot of sense. But also, they just need an offensive boost, some offensive help, as they were lacking that big time last season. So, it seems like the one thing that's scaring off St. Louis is all of the money that could come after this season. The opt-out with Arenado is going to be major for a lot of teams. if you are trading for him, then you are probably thinking he's staying long term. He's not going to take that opt out because he's got a lot of money coming his way. A lot of money. And it makes sense. The Cardinals, this is an offensive boost. This is something that would help them out a great deal. But I just don't think that they're necessarily comfortable in trying to lock up all of that money moving forward. So that's just a little bit of updates that we have on the rumor mill. Noise, it's coming in a lot hotter, a lot faster. We're hearing a lot more. This is starting to make me think that some moves potentially are starting to come, which is good. This is what we want to see. We need those first few dominoes to fall, and then it really feels like everything else is going to come into place. We're still questioning what a lot of these contracts are fully going to be. What's the guaranteed money? When you're playing in a global pandemic and a lot of teams lost money, and that's been reported. I mean, even teams as big as the Dodgers have lost some money this year. We're very interested to see how these contracts are going to shape up moving forward. Some of them might end up being a lot shorter. We're going to see. It's going to be interesting. So that's going to be it for talking about the rumor mill. We're going to take another quick break. But then when we come back, I want to talk about the biggest reliever on the market. Yeah, we gotta stick with some bullpen talk. We gotta give those guys some love because there's just times when they don't quite get enough. So taking a quick break, and we're gonna come back and talk about Mr. Liam Hendricks here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
One thing that's going to end up being very interesting in this offseason is the potential of the bullpen moves. Now, we have some guys that are definitely going to be out there for the taking, but if there is one closer that's kind of towards the top of the list just because what he's done over the last few years, it's going to be Liam Hendricks leaving the Oakland A's. Now, there's no doubt that signing relievers to big contracts is troubling. And we'll see if that actually ends up coming to be the case with all of the potential relievers that are out there. But given that relievers are becoming more and more valuable, considering the sense that we don't see pitchers necessarily going deep into games when they start as they used to, there's potential that ponying up for one of these guys is going to be great. So now, Liam Hendricks, 31 years old as a free agent, might arguably be the best reliever in the game. Last 2 years, 1.79 ERA, 161 strikeouts and 24 walks, over 110 and 1/3 innings for the A's. So definitely has a lot going for him there. Now, on the flip side, Hendricks had a 4.72 ERA in 8 seasons before that. Definitely a very different player, but now he's been throwing his four-seam fastball at higher velocities, much higher average spin rate, which is something that a lot of teams love to see. That spin rate is massive for teams and whether or not you are going to be very productive. And he has elite breaking ball type of stuff. And so that's just what's going to end up boosting Hendricks' value a lot more. Now, the A's decided not to extend him an $18.9 million qualifying offer. So he has no draft compensation whatsoever. But also, I mean, $18.9 million for a reliever is a very steep steep cost. But that doesn't mean that we aren't going to have a great list of teams that will not be interested in him. And I think we have to talk about a few of these teams for sure. I have roughly around 7 teams that we could for sure be seeing happen. The first one just makes way too much sense. The team that had potentially the worst bullpen we have ever seen in the Phillies last year. Highest bullpen ERA in the majors, 7.06. Tied in the MLB lead in blown saves, 14. When they missed the postseason by a single game, yeah, you need to start looking at the back end of your bullpen as a big problem, something that could fix this whole situation. Now, the Phillies have other things they need to look at as well. They might have to budget smartly. JT Realmuto is someone that they want back. Didi Gregorius was a guy that was there. He was, valuable to them. But they have to look at their bullpen. They really need to figure some things out there. Like last year, it's going to look a lot different for them. Okay? It's going to have a different look. Brandon Workman, Tommy Hunter, David Phelps, Blake Parker, Jose Alvarez, Adam Morgan, Heath Hembry are free agents. All of them. And Hector Neris is a candidate to be non-tendered. So there's going to be a lot of different names for the Phillies. But I would definitely think they're going to be one of those teams that's looking for a top-end guy potentially as well in this whole situation. Another team that needed pitching help, but also just needs pitching help all over the place, could be the Los Angeles Angels. Now, the Angels failed to rebuild any type of reliable pitching rotation, and it's kind of a big reason why this A's team has been disappointing over the last few years. We're going to talk about Mike Trout being a disappointment player, but you look at a lot of the teams he's had, and just the pitching is not there. Okay, it's not Trout's fault. He's been productive. He's been there. We need to get this guy in the postseason, and it's going to start with getting some help to their pitching lineup, whether it be starters but also bullpen guys. Now, their team's saves leader in 2019, Hansel Robles, had a 10.26 ERA in 2020. The Angels also tied the Phillies for most blown saves last year with 14. 4.63 ERA was the 10th highest. All problems. So, yeah, they need to look at their starting pitchers more. That's the bigger issue. We've known that for quite some time. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to look to their bullpen to try and get that to be a little stronger next year as well. Another team that's going to be very interesting, the San Francisco Giants. They almost made the postseason. They just missed out on a tiebreaker with the Brewers, gone out of it for the 4th straight year. And if the if the closing situation was a little different, things could have been better. Now, they had 3 guys combined to blow 7 of their 17 save chances last year. They didn't necessarily have a guy that they were confident in late in games. So, some big-time losses is what ultimately kept them out of the playoffs. And funny enough, a couple of those losses came against the A's and Hendricks, who ended up picking up a save in both of those games. The Giants just need something in their bullpen to help them out. The relievers posted a 20.9% strikeout rate last year. That's the 4th lowest in the MLB. And if there's something we know from Hendricks, 161 strikeouts over 110 innings. That's going to be a lot better looking in the back end of your bullpen. The Blue Jays, hey, why not throw them in on another situation where they're spending money? Now, they have Ken Giles, who's been battling some injuries, and that's been all over the place. Had Tommy John surgery. And overall, their bullpen was usually pretty good for the Blue Jays. A lot of different names throwing in there. Anthony Bass, AJ Cole, Jordan Romano, just to be a few of them. And they have some guys that are going to be free agents. So like Anthony Bass, he's going to be a free agent at the end of the year. None of these guys have had a steady mark in the majors. So that's why there's potential that they could be trying to up their bullpen in 2021. If you're going to be competing as well in the American League East, where you're going to have a lot of games there and have a lot of teams with strong offenses, it might not be a bad idea to make sure that your guy coming into close games is pretty steady as well. The Blue Jays are going to be competitive in the free agent market, going after a lot of different people. Why not up their bullpen? That could for sure be something that's going to help that team moving forward. Staying in that American League, well, the Astros are going to be another team that's going to be looking to their bullpen. Now, I think the Astros starting rotation is going to have a lot of young guys and have potential there. They got to figure out what their outfield's going to look like. But there's still some issues when it came to injuries last year. Now, Roberto Ozuna, Brad Peacock, they had some injury issues. And if healthy, maybe we're not talking about the Astros as in much of a need for bullpen health. Because like we said, the outfield is going to be very much in question. But a top end reliever also isn't going to be a bad thing for this team. If your offense bounces back a little bit, you're still going to be needing someone at the back end of games to help you out. And if the Astros also continue to think that they are contenders, having a good closer is not something that's going to hurt any team at all. And speaking of a team that thinks they could potentially be a contender and it's only going to help them out, is the San Diego Padres. Now, they seemed like they were going to have one great bullpen. They added Drew Pomeranz, Emilio Pagan, Tim Hill, already had Kirby Yates. But then Yates got hurt, Pagan, Hill, Stammen, Javi Guerra, they all were awful in the bullpen for him. Drew Pomeranz was pretty solid. So at the trade deadline, they went out and got Trevor Rosenthal, who was good for them and his time with San Diego, but he's a free agent as well. He's going to be another guy who's going to be intriguing. And Rosenthal could potentially return. But also Kirby Yates is a free agent as well. And even though he was hurt, that's another guy gone. And I was in the camp earlier in the year to say, hey, Pomeranz should maybe close out games because ever since his switch to the bullpen period, when he started doing that with the Brewers, he looked great. But there's a lot of questions with the Padres, and they have seemed to be very aggressive all around with their entire team. So a move where they're trying to solidify as well back into their bullpen when you got to play the Dodgers so often, you got to go and close games out in Colorado, you got to worry about a Giants team that, was ended up being a little scary. It's not a bad move for them to try to up in their bullpen as well. And another team that makes a lot of sense to me, it's going to be the Twins. Now, their bullpens always seems to be a thing that I'm very concerned about in every season. They always seem to get starting pitching that's okay. Their offense we know is going to be good. But I don't know who necessarily is going to be their guy at the back end. It feels like they haven't had a solid starter or a closer since Joe Nathan. That's what it feels like with the Twins. And Hendricks started things off with the Twins. Reunion wouldn't be a bad idea. They're a contender. They want any type of pitching help that they can get. So the Twins are another team that makes sense. And there's others. There's others that I would definitely consider. A reunion with Oakland is not out of the picture. Now, there's a lot of free agents that Oakland needs to worry about, and that's included in their bullpens. I mean, there's a lot that they have to replace there. So re-signing Hendricks might be a safe move and then trying to fill in the rest of the cracks. I just worry that he's going to price himself out. The Nationals, they're definitely a team that comes to mind. We don't really know what's going to be with their closing situation. Sean Doolittle's a free agent, so he's gone. After that, it looks a little grim. Maybe they go with Tanner Rainey as his closer, but Hendricks makes sense. Another team, I don't like the idea. Boston, I wouldn't be surprised if they get in the conversation. I think the pitching staff issue we need to figure out first is starters, although the bullpen isn't that great either. Pitching all around is just awful for Boston, but a top-tier closer might be something they think they need. And then the White Sox. The White Sox have another closer that's out on the free agent market, Alex Colomé, the guy who's going to make some money as well. Now, Colomé is someone who doesn't get you a lot of strikeouts, but he just gets people out. Maybe they want to up and get a little bit better and say, hey, maybe Liam Hendricks is more our speed. But there's other guys that could definitely be thrown into the rotation. So when it comes down to it, who's the team that we think should be offering the contract for him? It's got to be the Phillies. They make too much sense. You need to fix that bullpen. That was an issue. You are in the postseason and you are looking at second place finish, maybe even first place finish. If we can just fix some of those issues. You missed the postseason by a single game and you blew 14 saves. It was just a tragic story, and I can't believe that that's what happened in 60 games. I mean, if we stretch this thing out to a full season, who even knows what happens, how much they fall apart. it's a big fix there, and I know they need to spend money in other places as well. But if you tell me they come out of this offseason with re-signing Real Muto and also getting Liam Hendricks, I think that's a good place for the Phillies to be. I think that's a really good place. So they should be the team that offers up the most money. The team that I think that will, I feel like the Padres are just all in, and I wouldn't be surprised. I don't think they're going to go spend on another starter this year, although we do talk about it. But I don't think they want Pomeranz to be just their straight closer. And I think that they want someone else at that back end. You know, they showed that they made that trade for Trevor Rosenthal. They lost Kirby Yates. There's a lot of guys that are in question in the back end of that bullpen. So solidify that thing up. Make sure that you are looking more like a World Series contender. So that's the team that I think is gonna be out there. And ultimately, and your guess is as good as mine. I like top end closers, and I think they are important. But we're seeing more and more teams just have a bunch of guys. Look at what Tampa Bay did. I mean, they have a bunch of guys that throw the ball well, throw the ball hard. And that's obviously the better fit. Spread your money around and get a bunch. But I really do. I fall back on the Phillies. I really do. I think that's the place where he's going to end up. When you see that many blown games, that many issues late, I don't know as a front office how you can ultimately move forward without trying to fix that issue. I can't justify just sitting there and thinking it's going to be better next year. This isn't like a lot of my hitters where I feel like, hey, routine, getting a chance for everyone to play again, get some normal at-bats, stretching this out over 162 games, it gets better. It doesn't feel that way with bullpens. It doesn't feel that way with pitching as much. Now, will there be some bounce backs? For sure. For sure. But I definitely have some concerns moving forward with the Phillies. So their bullpen's going to look very different. Why not get a top-end guy? And maybe it's not just Hendricks. Maybe they're looking at Colomé instead. Maybe they're looking somewhere else. We'll see. But that's just the team that's going to be tied to a lot of bullpen arms, the Phillies. And they should be. They should be. They need that help. So we're going to take one last quick break. But when we come back, I want to talk about what is potentially the most intriguing position in this offseason. Mainly looking at our free agents. There's other names, but it's the spot where I always feel like it's the flashy spot in baseball. I want to talk about shortstops. So we're going to take one more quick break, and we're going to come back, talk about some of our major prospects that are out there for the bidding on some new teams.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
When it came to this year's free agency, there definitely was a lot that could potentially happen. Now, there is some strengths and some weaknesses all over the place. I know that I have been talking about the corner positions. There's some issues there. But if there is one position that I find very intriguing, it has to be at shortstop. Now, this is interesting for a few different reasons. One, it's not really like it's a great amount of depth, but there are some names there. Now, the headlining shortstops of this class, Didi Gregorius, Marcus Semien, and Andrelton Simmons. That's potentially 3 top 10 shortstops. I mean, that it's possible that you could make that argument. I would understand. But ultimately, there is also a massive free agency that's coming next year. Javier Baez, Carlos Correa, Francisco Lindor, Corey Seager, Trevor Story. So they're all going to be hitting the market soon. Some other teams might even be looking into the KBO free agent Hae-Sung Kim. There might also be some teams that are looking into KBO free agent Hae-Sung Kim. Potential there. But there's also other teams that just necessarily really need a shortstop. And this was even something that was put out there by Matt Kelly of MLB.com. Reds, Rangers, Brewers, Angels all come to mind as a potential team to maybe take their shot now. And that's why this is interesting. Somebody might go in on a shortstop this offseason and hope that they don't have to get into the bidding war of the 2021 Superclass. So that's why I wanted to take this chance. Let's talk about Didi Gregorius, Marcus Semien, and Andrelton Simmons. What's their highs? What's their lows in recent years? Pros and cons when it comes to weighing on which one you potentially could have. Because I really see these guys potentially ending up in very, very different situations. Starting things off with Didi Gregorius, there is a powerness to his game. Power hitting shortstops who hit from the left side. That's him and Seager. About it. Not many other options. Now, being a batting lefty and hitting with the Phillies and Yankees, pull happy or not, this is a big-time great spot for him to be. And the only shortstops that have more homers than Didi Gregorius, who has 98 since the start of his 2016 breakout season, is Trevor Story and Francisco Lindor. Okay, he had a pretty solid 2020 campaign and arguably better than Marcus Semien and Andrelton Simmons, picking up 116 weighted runs created. So where 100 represents league average, he's above that league average. And he's looking like someone who has recovered well from his Tommy John surgery. There's no real concerns. He is someone that is just a great power bat. He will give you some offensive production. And he was a massive stud at Citizens Bank Park at home in Philadelphia. And that also is something that was great for him with the Yankees, is that his home ballpark was a big part of the equation of why he had some extreme power. A lot of pull power. Which makes you wonder if, all right, if I put him in a lot of other different situations, am I going to be seeing the same amount of offensive production? And it looks like that is a major concern. If you don't have a short porch in right field, your power, expectations might need to be lowered a little bit for Didi. And that's also because he ranked very poorly on StatCast average exit velocity and hard hit rates. And despite all his home runs, if you're telling me that he is not hitting the ball necessarily hard, he might be just getting lucky or being in a very great situation. So having that offensive production is going to be huge for him, especially when you consider the fact that he's not necessarily a great defender. And he actually rates more as a poor defender. So if you are going to be going in on Didi, you need to be smart and safe with your decision. Are you sending him to a hitter-friendly park for half of your games? That's something that needs to necessarily be considered. So I think the opportunities for Gregorius are going to be limited. And, it makes sense as well. Like, the Brewers were another team that were in on Didi last year. So I wouldn't be surprised. Like, reunion with Philly makes sense. Going to Milwaukee makes sense. You got to be smart with your ballpark. That's just kind of what you need to be looking at with Didi. Now, Marcus Semien, pros, man, he is 1 year removed from having a great season. One of the best players in baseball. 3rd in the American League MVP voting in 2019. 5th across the majors and WAR. Outstanding season. If he puts together his WAR from 2019-2020, combined for the shortened season, he owns the highest two-year WAR of any available free agent at 8.8. So represented as a clubhouse leader, very durable, missing very few games. It was, I think, more than 7. I think he did that once in the past 6 seasons. So he's reliable. He's going to be there. He's going to be in your lineup. So the last 2 years, if you combine those, he's looked great. If you worry about the whole 2020 fall off for a lot of players, but you're like, can we really count that? He might be your guy. The little fall off he had in this season might actually bring down his value a little bit and help some teams out. So there's potential of something that could be great for you. What were his cons? Well, it's that 2019 season necessarily makes his 2020 year looks that much worse. So his batting average dropped to 223. He slugged 374 after going above 500 for the first time in his career in 2019. 213 point OPS decline. That's one of the biggest year-to-year drops from 2019 to 2020. So he had one of the biggest fall-offs. And something else that was also a major concern, we talk about Didi's issue with defense. Well, Semien had some sort of regression in defense as well. And that was a big part of why he had grown so much in 2019, why he got so much love and in WAR as well, is because his defense looked to be great. And that just fell off both in defensive run saves, and a lot of other metrics. And there's just some issues when it comes to Semien's defense, which at your shortstop position, talking about these first 2 options, you don't necessarily want your shortstop to be a poor defender. And it could be injury problems because we know that Semien played through some sort of side injury that took him out a little bit in September, making his case, even harder to really evaluate and look at the full thing. But teams truly need to figure out, all right, if we're going to shell out money here, are we getting the 2019 version or the 2020 version? Because there's a big difference between these two. Me committing a lot of money to this guy, it makes it a scary, scary situation. So we'll see what ends up happening there with that one. And our last one, Andrelton Simmons. Here's our flip side. One of the best defensive shortstops. One of the best. Only one of these free agents who's consistently elite on that side. 4-time Gold Glove winner. Won the 2013 Platinum Glove. Given to the best overall defender in every league. And that's just something that I also consider. Like, when I think of shortstop, I don't want this guy to be poor at defense. Your offense has to be a massive outweigh because you get a lot of work in the middle of the field. And when we go further back in history, we don't necessarily have the perfect defensive metrics like we do now. I shouldn't even say they're perfect. There's issues. But Simmons has 191 defensive career runs saved. And that's more on record than any other shortstop. And it's by a wide margin. Being an elite defenseman has helped him stay very valuable when he has not been as offensively productive. But with that said, there is one thing in which Simmons is very elite with batting. Simmons led all qualified hitters in strikeout rate in 2019, and he ranked in the 95th percentile in 2020. If you just want contact, he's going to give that to you. He's not out there to strike out a lot. But with that said, when he's putting the ball in play, it isn't necessarily offensive production. We had some surprising seasons. He had some AL MVP votes in 2017, 2018, but Simmons then regressed from that, well below an average hitter in 2019, 2020, 362 slugging, 82 OPS plus. And that might be what Simmons is at his best at the plate. And it's tough to admit, but that might just be the case. And that puts a lot of pressure on his defense because if his defense doesn't continue to be elite, you can't make any sense to overpay him. Now, 2020, we've talked about it before, is very concerning with a lot of players when it comes to any type of offensive play. And so you might get the benefit of the doubt because of that. But Simmons actually finished below average by defense, by StatCast, and that's in defensive runs saved, which is unlike him. So the 2020 season wasn't as friendly to his major strengths as well. And we could see teams just toss him out because of that short season. And they think, oh man, if his defense didn't stay steady, we can't afford to do this with his offense. But it's rare that we're going to see a team really take this 2020 season and think, okay, this is what this player is. And it's just bad timing for him. I mean, 31 years old, entering his free agent market. We'll see what it ends up doing for him, but I think Simmons is the guy who took the biggest hit, even with his down year. It's interesting with that. Simeon, I think a lot of people are going to believe that they can get him back on track to what he was. And Didi, it's going to be limited options, but we'll see. Like we talked about, I mean, there's teams that are going to be interested, but that's going to be because they're interested. They don't want to overpay next year. They don't want to do that. So we'll see what ends up happening with a lot of these teams in free agency because of that. So that's going to be it for this episode here, the GSMC Baseball Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. I want to thank you once again for tuning in. It means a great deal having your support, having your clicks, having your listen. All the support is greatly appreciated. If you have the opportunity, we'd love for you to leave a positive review, whether it be on the free agent market, rumor mills going around. What are your thoughts on the shortstops, maybe even the reliever market? Love to hear from you guys with anything that you could possibly give. Want to make sure you guys have a very happy and great Thanksgiving. Be out there, be safe. Make sure you can enjoy it any way you possibly can, whether that's with family and friends or not. Want you to have a very happy holiday and look forward to hearing from you guys. So I'm going to thank you one last time. As I sign off, I'm Collin Manley here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.